After 3 years, these players still refuse to say her name and give her her just due. When asked, who do you think is going to be able to break the record? I heard Olivia Miles. I heard Paige Beckers. I heard Marina Mabrey. Okay, Marina Mabrey scored 53 this year. All right. I heard Asia Wilson. Okay, I understand that. I heard Nafisa Collier. But I didn't hear that one player who just dropped 45 and 10 last week.
The Indiana Fever were 3 games into a winning streak heading into All-Star Weekend when the conversation around Caitlin Clark took an odd turn. It happened at the Orange Carpet event in Chicago, where players are typically asked lighthearted questions before the cameras roll into the weekend's festivities.
Which current player could break the 53-point WNBA scoring record?
Marina tied the WNBA scoring record with 53 points in a game. Which current player do you think is going to break that record?
I'm gonna have to go with Nafisa or Asia.
We have so many.
I'm gonna have to go with Nafisa or Paige. Why do you change your voice when you talk? Why do you change your voice when you talk? Now we have Gabriela Jaquez here.
See Asia breaking that.
Asia.
Oh yeah, Jaquez, you got Asia breaking that? Okay. Now here we go. 2 things happened here. 1, they're all so fearful that none of them said Caitlin Clark. Or 2, they asked other players as well, and those other players said Caitlin Clark, but it doesn't fit with the narrative, so they cut those out and they clipped all the non-Caitlin Clark answers together.
One of those questions, on paper, should have had an obvious answer. The league's single-game scoring record sits at 53 points, set by Marina Mabrey against the Los Angeles Sparks. Reporters went down the line asking all-stars who they thought might be the one to break it. Paige Buchers answered. Marina Mabrey answered, betting on herself. Ryan Howard, Bridget Carlton, and Gabriela Jaquez answered too. Almost every response converged on the same name, Aja Wilson, the reigning MVP and one of the most dominant scorers the league has ever produced. It's a defensible pick on its own merits. Wilson has built a Hall of Fame case on exactly that kind of individual scoring power. What stood out was who didn't come up. Just days earlier, Clark had delivered the best single performance of her career, dropping 45 points and 10 assists in a win over the Seattle Storm, becoming the first player in WNBA history to reach 40 points and 10 assists in the same game.
Angel Reese, VIP, very insecure. Damn.
It's so funny because when my plane was landing yesterday, he was right next to my plane too, and he was like, they were like VIP, nobody can get off the plane. I'm like, well, we VIP too.
Social value. You have Indiana Fever number 1, shocked. Dallas Wings number 2, shocked. Followed by the Lynx, followed by the Aces, followed by the Angel Reese, who the media tried to tell us who her fans that follow her around on their knees. They tell us that Angel Reese is a star in this league. They tell us that Angel Reese is a mega star in this league.
She'd done it while playing through a minutes restriction tied to a back injury, and she'd done it in fewer than 30 minutes on the floor, setting a Fever franchise scoring record in the process. Her name did not come up once. Clips of the exchange spread quickly once fans noticed the pattern. The reaction was pointed. Some framed it as an oversight born of habit, players naming the players they're used to associating with big scoring nights. Others read it as something closer to a pattern that's followed Clark for most of her career, in which her statistical peers seem reluctant to credit her publicly even as her numbers keep climbing. Comment sections filled with the same observation stated different ways. That whatever the explanation, the record book doesn't care who says a name out loud. That backlash arrived against the backdrop of a season already defined by scrutiny. WNBA insider Sarah Fenton addressed it directly on Yahoo Sports Daily a few days after Clark's record-setting game, describing the phenomenon of Clark's every accomplishment turning into a larger conversation. She noted that no matter what Clark does on the floor, it tends to get pulled into arguments that have little to do with basketball, with her name repeatedly used as a stand-in for other people's agendas. It's a dynamic that has followed her since her rookie season, when a 19-assist night against Dallas set a WNBA single-game record, and still became the subject of debate about whether her impact was being properly credited across the league. The Seattle game itself is worth sitting with on its own terms, separate from any of the surrounding noise. Indiana trailed by 6 points heading into the fourth quarter. Clark scored 16 of her 45 points in that final period alone, working through contested closeouts and stepping into shots from well beyond the arc. Her go-ahead 3 came from 26 feet out. with under 40 seconds left on the clock, breaking a tie that Seattle had fought to create. She finished 11 for 18 from the field, 6 of 10 from three-point range, and 17 for 19 from the free throw line, a night that also made her the fastest player in league history to reach 200 career three-pointers, doing it in just 74 games. Kelsey Mitchell matched her with 30 points of her own, extending a personal streak of 9 straight games scoring 20 or more, the 9th such streak in WNBA history. Together, the two guards combined for 75 points, a franchise record for any pairing in a single game. Clark had been playing under a restricted role for weeks by that point, limited to roughly 25 minutes a night while recovering from the back injury. Coach Stephanie White had been managing her workload carefully, and by Clark's own account, there was never a real conversation about pulling her from the fourth quarter once the game tightened. She said afterward that both her coaching staff and her trainers knew better than to try. The remark was as much a statement about her own competitiveness as it was about the medical staff managing her return, and it fit a pattern that has defined her 3 years in the league. Play through it, then let the box score speak for itself. That same week, before all of this played out, Clark had a very different kind of story of her own, though it wasn't about her. It belonged to her fellow All-Star Angel Reese, and it made the rounds for a much lighter reason. Reese was landing in Chicago ahead of All-Star Weekend when her flight was held on the tarmac. Crew members told the plane nobody could deplane, citing a VIP arrival. Reese, only half joking, pointed out that her group counted as VIPs too. The response was one word: Obama. Former President Barack Obama, a longtime supporter of the WNBA and an active presence around All-Star Weekend that year, had landed at the same time. Reese told the story herself at a press conference, laughing at her own assumption before conceding the obvious point that nobody was outranking a former president on that particular tarmac. She got her moment anyway, snapping a selfie with Obama once she was off the plane, a photo that quickly made its way around social media. It was a small, funny footnote to a weekend that otherwise carried a much heavier conversation about who gets credit for what in this league. The two stories sitting side by side captured something about the tone of the 2026 season. One was a lighthearted anecdote about a former president briefly outranking a WNBA All-Star on an airport tarmac. The other was a pointed reminder of how contested the conversation around Clark's place in the league remains, even as her production keeps setting new benchmarks. Neither story, taken alone, proves much of anything. Taken together, they reflect a league still working out how to talk about its own biggest storylines in real time. What isn't up for debate is the growing gap between where Clark started her career and where her game has arrived. She entered this season already holding the WNBA's single-game and single-season assist records, along with the rookie scoring record she broke in her debut year. The 45-point night against Seattle pushed her into territory no one in league history had reached before, a floor general who can also fill up a stat sheet in the way of a lead scorer. It marked her 4th career game, with at least 30 points and 10 assists, a combination matched only 4 other times across the entire history of the league. Records like that don't require commentary to hold weight. They exist in the same box scores everyone else gets measured against. The question that started this whole conversation, of who might eventually break the league's 53-point scoring record, remains genuinely open. A'ja Wilson has the resume to make a serious run at it. So does Mabry, who already holds the mark. Clark's own path to that number would likely look different from either of theirs, built less on isolation scoring and more on the kind of high-volume, high-efficiency shooting nights she's increasingly capable of stringing together. Whether her peers say her name out loud when asked that question is, in the end, a separate matter from whether she's capable of doing it. The players who named other candidates aren't required to see the game the way outside observers do, and reasonable people can watch the same box score and reach different conclusions about who's most likely to get there next. What's harder to argue with is the shape of her season so far. A back injury that limited her minutes for weeks. A restricted role that still produced a franchise record scoring night. A fourth-quarter takeover against a Seattle team that had built a real lead. And a response when asked about it afterward that suggested she'd sensed something coming before the game had even started. Describing a feeling she gets on certain nights, the sense that it's going to be one of those games even before the ball is tipped. It was, and the league's record book now reflects it, regardless of who was or wasn't willing to say so out loud a few days later on a red carpet in Chicago. Here's a continuation to append to the script. The back-to-back scheduling made the performance even harder to ignore. Clark had record-setting numbers on a Friday night and was already telling reporters she intended to suit up the very next evening against the New York Liberty, on zero rest, still technically playing under the same injury management plan that had capped her minutes for weeks. It wasn't the kind of decision a coaching staff makes lightly, and it wasn't one Clark left up for discussion. By her own description, once she saw the final stat line, 45 points and 10 assists sitting next to each other on the same page, her reaction was less analytical than instinctive, something closer to disbelief than satisfaction. There's a version of this story that gets told purely in comparisons. Against Vandersloot's assist record, against Angel McCoughtry's early rookie marks, against Wilson's scoring peaks, against Mabry's 53-point night that still sits atop the league. Clark's game increasingly resists that kind of single-lane comparison. She isn't chasing one record in isolation. She's stacking scoring nights on top of a player who already owns the league's assist record, which is a different kind of accumulation than what most historically great scorers have built their reputations on. That combination is part of why analysts covering the league keep describing her impact as difficult to categorize using the usual metrics. None of that resolves the tension from All-Star Weekend. It just adds more weight to the side of the argument that says the omission mattered. A player capable of the kind of night she had against Seattle doesn't need her peers to say her name for the accomplishment to count. But the fact that they didn't, in a room full of cameras built specifically to celebrate the league's biggest moments, is its own kind of data point, one that fans clearly weren't willing to let pass without comment.